Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Romani Varanasi, and I'm so pleased to be here today with Laurie Halloran, President and CEO of the Halloran Consulting Group. Welcome, Laurie.
Thank you, Romani. I'm so pleased that you invited me here today.
I'm really excited to have this conversation, Laurie. I know you have been in the space of clinical trials and trial design and trial enrollment and conducting for many, many years. So what I'm going to maybe have you do to just kick us off is give us a little bit of background on yourself and your organization and tell us how the organization came to be.
Will do. I started as a nurse. I realized that I didn't like nursing after I graduated. So I fell into clinical research, and I worked for quite a while in a CRO that grew very large, 10 times the size during the time that I was there. I then left because I was going to have my first son, and I started the business without really having a plan for what I wanted to do. Needed daycare, so I went into a biotech company. That went really well. They sold their product, so now I needed a new company. Went to a new company, and what a lot of small biotech companies do is they wait until they're really ready for the people that they bring in, like clinical development, until they're in clinical development. And in the second company that I worked in, they were in late phase clinical development, and they had already spent $400 million on a product that when I got there, I realized would never be approved, because everything they had done was so sloppy and skipped many important things. And they didn't have quality built in. And my name was going to be on it. And I didn't want to have my name associated with that level of quality. So I went back to my business and decided that what we could do was offer early stage biotech, life science companies of all sizes a team of really seasoned experts to get them from very, very early science right on through as far as they needed to go before they could hire full-time people. And they would probably get better medicines developed, saving time, probably saving money, and getting those patients the treatments that they really needed. And that's what we do. And it's been 20 years since I went back to the company. And we now actually have a bigger pipeline than Pfizer that we work on.
Wow. Okay. So we have a lot to cover here. I have tons of questions, but let me start with pipelines. And when you say a bigger pipeline than Pfizer, that says a lot. And so, as you know, many of the listeners and viewers of Lioness magazine, which is the group hosting our discussion today, probably don't know much about clinical trials and the process, et cetera. So a couple of points. Walk us through what the standard clinical development process is, sure, and then help me understand how you guys have a bigger pipeline than Pfizer. Like that's huge in scale. And that just in terms of running a business, I mean, I can't imagine how intricate and complicated that must be from a project management perspective. So there's a lot to cover, but why don't we start a little bit with just what is the process of clinical development overall?
Sure.
Just share that with us.
So often the people who start biotech companies or medical device companies or any kind of life science company come from the scientific world, and they study their science and they hone their scientific theories. And at some point they need to determine what type of disease are they going to go after to try to treat and what type of patient population. And that process, if it's done really well, will prioritize to the patients who are least likely to already have treatment for that disease. And just as a simple example, it could be breast cancer stage 1 or breast cancer stage 4. And the people who have breast cancer stage 4 are likely to have very limited treatments. So if a biotech company is going to develop a treatment for that, they'll be very well received if they have good data by FDA. So a big part of this is designing the entire program so that you're honing in on the most unmet medical need and then executing it to a really high standard. So what we do with a lot of these companies is they come and a lot of scientific founders think that what they've discovered is the best thing ever created in the history of the universe. And we help them get a little bit more reality about that. And then we help them figure out what the experiments are that they need to do in order to meet FDA standards, because FDA will not let you study new medicine in humans until it's been thoroughly studied in animals. And that takes years, and it costs hundreds of millions of dollars in some situations. And if you can be really efficient in that process, you can often save a lot of time, have a very focused approach, and that ultimately saves money. So in the companies that we work with, probably 30+% of them come to us at that phase. And we help them define what their integrated development strategy should be. Often they need that really well-crafted plan to go and raise money. So when I say the pipeline is bigger than Pfizer's, every single drug isn't in late-stage clinical trials, because what you really need to do is have a focused plan to get into clinical trials. And then you have to have someone who's a really seasoned regulatory expert to defend your plan to the FDA, because that's what their job is to make sure that the patients that are enrolled in clinical trials have the best chance of having treatment that will show efficacy and best chance for safety. And that's a very large part of what we do.
Yeah, that's like, it's really interesting. The question I have here is, so clinical trial development, there's, whenever you talk about processes and timelines, there's got to be strict protocols in place, correct? You do A, you do B, you do C, and there's a timeline within which it's done. There are sites you coordinate with, and it's a very intricate project management activity, right?
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about this. So you talked about the standard clinical trial process. COVID has now come into play. How does living through COVID, through all of that rigorous process and timeline mechanism, et cetera, into a little bit of a whirling dervish loophole here?
Sure.
So the question really is, how has COVID impacted what you and your organization do? Because it's almost like you've got to, all of a sudden, there's a big void, I think, and you've got to figure out a way to fill it. So tell us what the void is.
Sure.
I don't want to take away from your answer, but COVID has had a huge impact. So tell us how that has impacted what you and your organization do in support of companies, and how have these companies dealt with running clinical trials in the COVID world?
So the biggest thing that happens, and the thing that I think is an incredibly positive thing that's come out of COVID, is that people now have a very, very good idea about how medicine gets developed. And they really didn't pay attention to it before. So everyone in the world is watching the vaccines. The real challenge, and this is everything from weight loss drugs to early labor drugs to pain pills, you name it, it's across the board. The patients have to volunteer to be a subject in the study. And a lot of people didn't really want to do that because they didn't want to be a guinea pig. And so it's always been really difficult to get eligible patients who are interested in being on studies unless they have a life-threatening illness. What COVID did for those patients with a life-threatening illness was it threw everybody into a state of panic, because everyone was afraid to go anywhere. They were afraid to visit a hospital. They didn't want to be encountering, especially with a life-threatening illness, they didn't want to encounter anyone who might have had COVID. So really early on in the pandemic, we saw that, because again, we have such a broad range of clients, and we started jumping in and taking a leadership role in setting up, we called them town halls. And we invited everyone who wanted to come and hear what everyone else and what the community was doing to try to keep continuity in the clinical trial space. A lot of what has come out of that is an adoption of technology that the industry was always very reticent to go for. The technology has been around. So if you think about your iPhone, you think about doing surveys on your iPhone, you think about doing FaceTime, that's all now integrated into how clinical trials can be done. It's working out the details and making sure that we've got the data collection to its highest standard. But I would like the industry to really leapfrog ahead because of COVID and because of the willingness of all of the life science companies to look at alternatives for collecting the data and interacting with patients. It's also made patients front and center, and that's huge because they always should have been.
So it's interesting because what you're talking about, there was an article in today's New York Times. I don't know if you saw it. I'll send it to you. The title is Clinical Trials Are Moving Out of the Lab and Into People's Homes, right? And they talk in here about face-to-face interaction being risky for patients to go in and get monitored and tested in labs, et cetera. Patients who are on trials, that is. So right now, virtual studies, people are saying it's long overdue. And so, as you said, home-based, analysis, and then you ship your data to the doc, who then checks in with you once a week or once every 2 weeks, whatever the case may be, and monitors you at home in terms of side effects and other sort of efficacy measures or safety measures here. So AI is sort of integrated into a lot of what pharmaceuticals or the biopharma industry talks about a lot. So talk to us a little bit. You just, sort of started to dovetail into that, into the area of what it would be like to run these virtual trials. And is that where the industry is going? Has the pandemic opened the door for the industry to truly go there? Are there leaders leading that way? And is this a space that people are going to follow very quickly?
Those are so many questions.
Because it's a great topic.
It has opened the door. It very much has opened the door. I think different companies have different levels of risk tolerance. So one of the things that we haven't touched upon is that every single set of data that's collected for the study gets entered into the patient's medical record, but it also gets entered into a separate place that ultimately becomes the database by which the sponsor company, the pharma company, and the regulatory bodies make a decision about the safety and effectiveness of the drug. So the process of collecting that information was, when I was doing it, was on paper. And you had to send people to the hospital, and they had to sit and they had to compare the paper in the medical record to the paper in the data collection forms. This is what I believe is the biggest leapfrog, because that actually doesn't have to be done in person anymore. The technology has advanced to the point where it can be streamed, it can be collected. There's one impediment, and that's getting permission from the electronic health records at the medical institutions for that data to be extracted. And that's, to me, the biggest hurdle that we still haven't figured out, because it's not consistent across every hospital or every institution. But almost everything else can be collected on apps. It can be collected on telephone interviews. It can be collected with a home health nurse who can come, or you can go to a lab and get your labs drawn. There's something called the 2-minute walk test. And people used to have to fly a patient to the doctor. Even if they were thousands of miles away, they would fly back and forth. It literally could be done by watching a patient on your iPhone do that 2-minute walk test. So I think we've just begun to open the doors. The challenge ahead is not to go back. The challenge is to continue to move forward, because I think the industry is very excited about this, but the industry is only one part of it. It's the patients, it's the physicians, it's the healthcare institutions, and we all need to be collaborating so that we're all moving forward together without making any shortcuts. And I look at that as exciting, because I see that's what's coming.
Well, talk to us a little bit about the regulatory process supporting some of these accelerated approaches to dealing with virtual trials and data collection. I mean, how are the regulatory agencies, are they
good question,
like hugging, are they open-armed about this and hugging the industry and saying, bring this on because we want to work with you to make this happen? Because the ultimate goal of the industry, our industry, is to get drugs into patients quickly, safe drugs, and drugs that are efficacious. So how does a regulatory agency fit into this new way of possibly doing things here?
So on a policy level, the regulatory agencies, all of them, are very positive about this. They have come out and made declarations early on in the process. They have new guidances that are coming out this year that are around how to try to collect and extract patient data most efficiently. But policy is different than practice. Mm-hmm. And I've done multiple panels. You might not be surprised by this, but I've done multiple panels with many people from pharma companies about what it actually looks like on the ground. And in some patients, it makes total sense. If you're doing a follow-up visit for somebody who had, I don't know, surgery or a treatment years out, a phone call is a great way, or a handheld video is a great way to do that follow-up. But the key is the discussion has to happen between the pharma company and the FDA prior to doing the study. And the person doing that discussion from FDA isn't always the exact same person. And in fact, it's never the exact same person as the person at the end who's inspecting the data, making sure that what you did was done right. And that's where we have to get better at working together. The meeting I was just in was about something very similar. It was a COVID study. It was really rushed, and every T wasn't crossed and every I wasn't dotted. Well, what will FDA do with that? That's really a concerning question for the folks who ran the study, because they were doing their best work, but we don't know yet what FDA will do or what the regulatory bodies will do. Europe is not that much different in how they inspect the studies at the end, because remember, their major goal is to have a safe drug that's effective. And so if there's a lot of missing pieces, there are potential dangers that they won't like that. So it's a very, very fast moving time right now, and COVID made it really fast. And I think there's a certain amount of taking a deep breath and figuring out what does work and having conversations proactively. I don't think we'll ever go back to where we were. But I think there's still a lot of collaboration that has to happen going forward. I think the big thing is the industry and FDA are now not seen to be antagonistic to each other. They're seen to be trying to work together so that they can bring these treatments. And COVID has really helped that a lot.
Well, I mean, COVID has helped it a lot. I mean, we saw a vaccine approved within 12 months. From viral sequence to, basically drug in patient,
yes.
Which is brilliant. Clearly, for the viewers of this, that is not how drug development happens. That's probably a best of best case scenarios. But I think it's something to aspire to for other therapeutic areas and other modalities, not just vaccines. There are lots of hurdles, as you mentioned, to overcome, one of them being regulatory. So let's just switch gears a little bit, talking about, dovetailing from the regulatory agencies and how they view clinical trial design and data collection and data analysis to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, this is a topic that, every discussion that I am part of, whether it's about investment into a company, whether it's about how to pitch an investor, whether it's about what research area you're going to focus on, how are you going to run a trial, how are you going to commercialize a drug, how are you going to hire people into your company, et cetera, at the board level, at various levels, always has to bring to the table this opportunity of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I'd love to get your perspectives, Laurie, on with Moderna and Pfizer. They were really successful, as I understand it, in terms of implementing or including the whole diversity equation into their trial design, because ultimately every disease impacts everybody. It doesn't just impact a particular race or a particular demographic. So how is your group, how are you all thinking about guiding companies in their design of trials so that they are casting the widest net possible in terms of ultimate application of their drug, their product, to a wide group of patients?
Well, so one of the things, I mean, this is another 45-minute topic. One of the things that we're doing is we have an AI-focused thing that you run your documents through, and it points out where you have a word that isn't going to resonate well with populations that are diverse. So that's a simple little thing that could be done. But at the same time, in a really huge way, our local biotech association, Mass Bio, is actively reaching out, trying to get members of the community, the life science community, who are from a diverse background, to do basically endorsements of the work that they've been doing, saying that this is something you should believe in. So it can be as small as looking at a word and as big as getting community involvement in standing behind the work that you've done. And I announced that in my company, and I had several people immediately volunteer who are from diverse backgrounds to go on LinkedIn and to go out there in social media and post that. Is that going to solve the problem? Not completely. We have to get more diverse physicians who are interested in participating in clinical trials, because a lot of patients of all kinds don't want to go to a doctor they don't know to be in a study. I went and volunteered to be on the Pfizer study, and I went to Boston Medical Center, which is in an area that's, really inner city, lots of diverse people around. That to me, that was a great place for them to have that study, because it didn't put an extra burden on the patients. So I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer. It's having a much higher level of awareness. And I know that the industry, at least in Massachusetts, is really, really paying attention to this.
Yeah, absolutely. It all starts with awareness, as we know. And then just looping back into this discussion on DEI, the regulatory perspective, is the FDA sort of saying this must be a criteria by which you run your trials? Have they given that solid type of guidance, or how are people navigating with the FDA on this?
I don't know that answer off the top of my head. I was asked that before the pandemic even started, and they do have part of the agency has a working group on diversity in clinical trials. I just don't know what's evolved over the course of the pandemic about that. There are research sites that are really focused on this, and I'm including it in an upcoming big executive retreat that I'm going to have to really get at it. The thing that's great about it is it's never really been this obvious before.
Yeah, right.
So calling attention.
Exactly. I mean, recent events over the past, in 2020 have brought this to the forefront. And I think anyone who doesn't think about it and focus on it and figure out a way to address it is probably not doing justice to their role in whatever they do.
Yeah.
But let's switch let's switch gears again, kind of dovetailing off of DEI and talking a little bit about your organization. I did notice as I was scrolling through your website that your whole executive team is women. Really thrilled about, because as you know, the Lioness magazine really serves women entrepreneurs. You are a women entrepreneur, and you've hired, as it seems, lots of women to be on your executive team. That's wonderful. Tell us a little bit about that and how that happened.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of women in life science. They just tend to kind of fall off as the titles go higher. I am really, really, I'm the kind of person who believes it's one team, one dream, as the company does. And I've learned a lot about myself over the last year. I'm a really good delegator. I don't want to get in anybody's way. And we work so well together. It's just incredible. We got nicknamed the Badass Ladies, which is really cool. And we were kind of naturally set up so that each one of my team had a major focus: a CFO, a chief development officer, VP of operations, and a chief client officer. So there's no competition. There's only collaboration. And I don't think of myself as being any better than they are. Yeah. I want their opinions. I value their opinions, and I don't try to get in their way. So I guess those would be the things that I would say, as a woman executive, those are the things to pay attention to. What can you do to help your team succeed and to give them opportunities? And that isn't necessarily just women, but I think women tend to, if they have that mindset, they tend to be a lot more open to paying it forward and bringing someone along. It's been a thing that I've spent a lot of my career doing is mentoring women and giving back. So, but they're fantastic.
I know you've been very involved in mentoring and giving back. I see this, I see you navigate quite well in the industry in doing a lot of that. So you're well known for that, Laurie. I do have a tagline for you guys though. So you're saying, what did you say? The badass women, and your tagline can badass and your tagline can be, don't mess with us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about entrepreneurialism and being a woman. You started this organization 22 years ago, or 20 some odd years ago. Very different time back then, very different time right now. Tell us a little bit about the challenges you faced back then, and are there any of those challenges that you still face today? Has there been progress truly?
It's a great compound question. The challenges that I faced at the time, which I now look back at and say I was probably pretty lucky that I had this insight, was I did not know what I was setting out to do. But what I did know was I knew myself, and I knew what I was good at and what I wasn't good at. And I wasn't afraid to look at what I needed and go out and get that and ask for help. Many women make the mistake of thinking that they have to be good at everything, and they don't. You play to your strengths. So one of the things I did really early on was I started looking for groups of people that I could learn from. And I have always been a member of a CEO affinity group. It has changed and morphed and grown, but I've always been a member because I could be myself. I could reveal the things I don't know and not feel at all like I'm coming across as uninformed or not the right person for the job. But that really opened me up to the things that I should stay focused on and the things that I should find somebody else to stay focused on instead. And it doesn't really change, but I've gotten more savvy. I've also realized that you're never done learning. Yeah. You have to keep learning. If you think that being at a C level in a company is you're there and you can just sit back and relax, that's a mistake. We did an employee stock ownership purchase of 30% of the company in December, because I want my team to feel like they're owners. I feel like that's going to really make us all row the boat in the same direction. Now I need to understand what's going to happen with that afterwards, because it's very different than having investors. We're the investors in our own company. So that's probably the thing I would say I've stayed away from the most, is I don't want investors coming in and telling me what to do.
And you don't need them to, right? I mean, you've got a business that is self-sustaining. Your revenue stream is there and it's growing, and you're supporting companies to advance. And so you don't need external investment in the traditional sort of biotech startup sense. Right. So vulnerability is a theme you mentioned, which I think is so critical for leaders, especially women leaders, to show. It's okay to be vulnerable. Men should also be showing vulnerability, and I think they tend to have these walls up against themselves. And the other thing I heard there is empowerment, which again I truly support and agree with. Let me kind of maybe end, if you will, with one last question. And this question is a little bit of an off-the-wall one, so just bear with me. So what would you say, Laurie, your superpower is? Amuse us with that one.
I have two of them. One is I can see where something doesn't exist and should. This company is that. It was a gap, and we filled it, and we're really well known now and really well respected because we do really good work. My second one is seeing where a person and a situation fit really well. So I can't tell you how many people I've introduced who've ended up getting married, but I do it professionally, where I can see that a person or a situation requires a set of characteristics, and my brain won't stop churning until I see where that fit could be. And a lot of people don't do that, so I would say that's my superpower.
That's excellent. It's a have. Your role. Look, Laurie, I want to thank you for taking the time to chat with me today and to share your perspectives on, the unique role that clinical trials and clinical development plays in the overall scheme of drug development and getting products to patients. And as you said earlier, COVID, for all the bad things it's brought to us, has brought also something good, and that is that it's elevated the role and the view of biopharma in the eyes of the general public. And so what you and your group do has supported that immensely. So again, thank you for doing what you guys do at Halloran. So I'm going to end here, and I want to thank the audience for joining us. And my name again is Ramani Varanasi. I'm the CEO of Xbiotics Therapeutics, and I look forward to having more conversations about all fun things and all the things that we're doing in the biopharma industry. And we'll chat again soon. So Laurie, thank you again for being with us today.
You are welcome. This was great.
Okay.